there are days when even the smallest tasks feel heavy, when even your own breath feels far away, when morning comes, but light never quite reaches your chest. Maybe today is one of those days. And if so, I want you to know you found a place where you don't need to explain anything, not to others, not even to yourself. A place not for fixing, but for resting, not for achieving, but for arriving, not for effort, but for exhale. So before we begin, if you'd like to carry this kind of quiet into more corners of your life, if something in you is quietly whispering, I want more of this, go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe not out of pressure, but as a promise to your own stillness. Because what we share here is not fast, it's not loud, it's not made to impress. It's made to return you to yourself. Once, in a wind-washed village, there lived an old weaver. She never hurried, never explained the symbols. She wove into her cloth. When asked what she was making, she would smile and whisper, a place where even silence can rest. People didn't understand, but those who sat with her, even for a while, left with slower breathing, left carrying something invisible, yet deeply known. That's what we begin here. Not a journey toward more, but a soft undoing. Not a lesson in being better, but in being exactly what you already are when you finally stop trying. You may be here because life felt too loud, because your questions had no place to land, or maybe because you simply longed for something you couldn't name. Whatever the reason, I'm glad you arrived. Tonight's stories are not answers. They are invitations, mirrors, gentle echoes of Zen, shaped not by force but by centuries of quiet watching. They won't instruct you, but they may help you remember how to breathe again, as if for the first time, how to let your shoulders soften, how to sit in stillness and trust that it too is alive, because even emptiness holds presence. Even not knowing can be peace. So if you're ready, bring your attention home. Let the world outside blur. Just for a moment, let your body rest into the space it's in. This is not a lesson. It's a hush. Not a journey, but a gentle return. Let us begin. There once lived a man named Elias, a scholar of extraordinary discipline. He had read more books than he could remember texts on mindfulness, treatises on consciousness, entire libraries of Eastern and Western philosophy. From psychology to spiritual neuroscience, he absorbed knowledge like a sponge. But though his mind grew sharper, his heart grew heavier. He didn't quite know why. On paper, he was thriving. People listened to him speak. His advice was often sought. Yet, when he sat alone, a deep restlessness visited him. Not loud, but persistent. A quiet ache that no theory could touch. It was during one of those silent evenings that Elias packed a single bag and left. No destination, no itinerary, just a vague sense that he needed to go. Somewhere quieter than his thoughts. He wandered through small towns, followed the sound of wind more than any compass. Days passed, until, finally, in the folds of a foggy mountain, he found a place of retreat with no sign, no gate, just a path softened by pine needles and footsteps. There, under a crooked tree, sat an old man. He didn't rise when Elias approached, didn't speak, only looked at him with eyes like still water, not judging, not inviting, just seeing. Elias bowed, unsure why. "I've come," he said, "to learn how to quiet the mind." The old man tilted his head. "Is it noisy?" Elias nodded. "All the time." "Then you must be tired." "I am." "Would you like some tea?" Elias blinked, caught off guard by the question, but he nodded. "Yes, please." The old man disappeared behind a curtain of bamboo. Minutes later, he returned with 2 cups and a teapot made of worn clay. He poured into Elias's cup, and poured, and kept pouring. The liquid rose to the rim, spilled over the edge, spread across the wooden table, then began to drip onto the earth below. Elias stood, quickly. "Your cup, it's overflowing." The old man set the pot down, looked at Elias, and smiled gently. "So are you." There was no accusation in his voice, just clarity. Elias opened his mouth to explain, to protest, but nothing came. His arguments, his thoughts melted like wax. That evening, he lay on a straw mat, staring at the wooden beams above. He had come to learn something new. But perhaps learning wasn't what he needed. Perhaps he needed to forget, to make space, to stop trying to collect peace like another concept, and simply let it find him. The next morning, the old man was sweeping fallen leaves near the footpath. Elias watched in silence. The broom moved like breath, rhythmic, patient, effortless. Later that day, Elias offered to help. The old man handed him a broom. No instructions, just a nod. Elias began to sweep, unsure at first. He thought about where to stand, how to move, whether he was doing it right. And then he remembered the tea. His mind was the cup, and it was spilling. He exhaled and swept, not to impress, not to understand, just to sweep. Days passed this way. The routine simple, almost monastic. Sweep, breathe, eat, sit, watch the wind move through tall grass, watch his own thoughts come and go, like visitors knocking and leaving. But the mind, clever as it is, doesn't quiet easily. One afternoon, Elias approached the old man again. "I feel like I'm failing," he confessed. "I keep thinking, I keep analyzing. I want to let go. But even that becomes something I try to do. How do I stop grasping?" The old man pointed to a bird's nest balanced delicately on a branch above them. "Do you see that nest?" Elias nodded. "It holds the eggs, but not by gripping them, only by being open in the right shape." Elias said nothing, but something in him softened. He began to understand emptiness wasn't absence, it was readiness. He had spent his life clenching onto ideas, onto identities, onto meaning. But real peace was not clenched. It was cradled. In the nights that followed, Elias started waking early. Before the sun, he would sit outside, watching dew form on blades of grass, his breath slow, no longer performing presence, just being present. One morning, he found the same teacup from that first day resting on the table. Inside it, a single yellow petal floated in a thin layer of cool tea. He picked up the cup, drank slowly. It tasted like nothing. It tasted like rain. It tasted like beginning again. Years later, back in the city, people noticed something different about Elias. He still spoke, still wrote, but his words carried fewer edges, more silence, more space. A student once asked him, "Master, What changed you? Elias smiled. I stopped trying to drink from a full cup. The student frowned. What does that mean? Elias looked at him kindly. It means I started listening before speaking, breathing before fixing, and letting myself be empty so that life could pour itself in. The student said nothing, but something in him heard. And maybe, so have you. Maybe tonight, as you listen to this story, you realize how tightly you've been holding the handle of your own cup, how full you've kept it with plans, with roles, with voices not your own. Maybe now is the time to tip it just slightly, not to lose everything, but to make room for something softer. You are not wrong for seeking. You are not broken for being full. But peace, like tea, cannot be poured into a vessel that refuses to let go. So, ask yourself gently, what am I holding that no longer nourishes me? What would it feel like to loosen? Just one grip. What if emptiness isn't loss, but invitation? You don't need to answer with words. Just notice what stirs in the silence. Then sit quietly and let the next breath be your teacher. When Caleb arrived at the mountain monastery, he still carried the sound of the city in his bones. Emails, alarms, arguments they echoed inside him like aftershocks. He had come here not because he was spiritual, but because he was exhausted. Somewhere deep inside, he believed that silence might be an antidote to the noise. The monks welcomed him without ceremony. No application forms, no questions. Just a nod, a simple room, and a wooden broom leaning against the wall. On his first morning, before sunrise, he was handed that same broom by an elderly monk named Soren. No instructions, no lecture, just a smile, and the words, "You'll sweep the courtyard." Caleb looked at the sprawling stone path before him, still slick with dew. He wasn't sure how this task would help him feel peace. He had imagined meditation cushions, perhaps some deep conversation about the nature of reality. Not cleaning, but he swept, badly. At first, his strokes were rushed, his grip was tight. He kept thinking about posture, about progress. Was he doing it right? Was this even Zen? Soren passed by quietly, his sandals brushing the stone. He didn't correct him, didn't explain, just watched for a moment, then disappeared into the mist. Day after day, Caleb swept, and day after day, he struggled. He tried to focus on his breath, but his thoughts kept darting to conversations left unfinished, to the pain in his lower back, to what he would say if someone asked him what he had learned. He read books from the monastery's small library at night, essays on impermanence, on non-self, on the Eightfold Path. He underlined sentences, took notes, but in the morning, he was still handed the broom. Finally, one afternoon, after nearly 2 weeks, Caleb exploded. He found Soren arranging small stones in the garden and said, "I came here to learn something real, and all I do is sweep. I don't feel more peaceful. I don't feel awakened. I just feel tired. Don't you teach anything here?" Soren stood, brushed the dirt from his robes, and picked up his own broom. "When I sweep," he said, slowly, "I sweep." Caleb frowned. "What does that even mean?" Soren looked at him. "It means I'm not trying to reach anywhere while sweeping. I'm not thinking about how it looks. I'm not judging the dust. I don't sweep to get somewhere. I sweep because it's time to sweep. He paused, then added, "Peace isn't in the dust being gone. It's in not needing the dust to be different while you move." Caleb didn't respond. He felt foolish, small, but not shamed. That evening, he sat alone under a plum tree. For once, he didn't open a book, didn't plan anything. He watched the last rays of sunlight slide across the stones he had swept earlier. A breeze passed through, scattering a few leaves over the clean path. And he smiled. It wasn't a lesson. It wasn't insight. It was just enough. The next morning, Caleb picked up the broom differently, not as a means to learn, not as a spiritual assignment, just as a broom. He swept the way trees move, in wind, naturally, without trying to impress the forest. He began to notice the curve of the handle against his palm, the sound of bristles on stone, the way dust curled like breath before settling again. He didn't chase stillness, but sometimes it came. And when it didn't, that was fine too. He had stopped trying to get it. And that's when something began to shift. Not dramatically, not like a door flung open, more like a window left ajar, letting in a wind he had forgotten he missed. By the time Caleb left the monastery, a month had passed. He had never sat through a formal Dharma talk, never recited a sutra, but he had swept every day. And somehow, that had changed him. He no longer saw simplicity as something lesser. He no longer needed theory to touch truth. Years later, a friend who was burned out from work asked him, "How did you reset your mind? Was it a technique?" A teacher Caleb thought for a moment, then said, "A broom taught me." The friend laughed. "You're serious?" He nodded. When you do one thing, and only that thing, for long enough, the mind begins to remember what it was before it got so tangled. The friend raised an eyebrow. "Sounds boring." Caleb smiled. "So does breathing, until you realize it's the only thing keeping you alive." This is what Zen offers, not drama, not fireworks, but a return to what's real beneath the commentary. It reminds us that peace doesn't need to be manufactured. It's what remains when we stop performing. What happens when you sweep without trying to finish? When you wash dishes not to be done, but to touch the water? When you walk without needing to arrive? This isn't passivity. It's presence. It's the way the moon doesn't race the sky. The way your hand rests on your chest when no one is looking. The way the earth turns, not because we command it, but because it simply does. So tonight, ask gently, what am I doing right now? Am I in it, fully? Or am I watching myself from a distance, narrating instead of living? Can I return to just this, the sweep, the sound, the breath, not to awaken, just to be here, alive, enough, in the heart of a wide and whispering valley? There was once a young woman named Mira. She had spent most of her life in libraries, lecture halls, and long nights of study. She had degrees in comparative religion, certificates in neuroscience, even credentials in contemplative therapy. She could quote ancient texts with precision and diagram the neural pathways of compassion. But still, something in her felt untouched. She knew how the brain processed pain. She understood the theories behind suffering. But none of that knowledge stopped the ache in her chest when the world went quiet. Her head was full, endlessly analyzing, but her heart remained at a distance watching, waiting. uninvited. So, one autumn, she left everything. She told no one. She packed lightly, and she walked not to escape, but to soften, to forget what she knew, or maybe to feel what she had forgotten. Eventually, the road led her to a small wooden gate. Beyond it, a temple folded into the hillside like a secret. There were no signs, no rituals, just stillness that met her like an old friend. She was welcomed not with words, but with space. For weeks, Mira joined the rhythm of the place. She swept the leaves, washed bowls, carried water from the stream. She sat with the others in silence each morning. But inside, her mind remained active, naming, interpreting, classifying. It tried to understand stillness the way it understood theory, by holding it at a distance. One evening, she approached the head teacher, an elder named Anju. His back was bent from decades of bowing. His eyes held the quiet of someone who had cried enough and loved enough to stop explaining. "Master," she said softly, "I've studied the Dharma all my life. I can teach it, write about it, but I can't seem to feel it. I want to go deeper, but I don't know how. The more I try to understand, the further it seems." Anju nodded, not with pity, but with knowing. He led her outside. The night was clear, stars like scattered prayers. He pointed toward the moon. "What do you see?" he asked. "The moon," she answered. "Is that the moon, or your name for it?" She hesitated. "It's both." He nodded again. "When you look at the moon through a telescope, you can describe its surface, its craters, its distance. But when you walk beneath it, barefoot in the grass, and let it touch your skin, that's something else. You can know the moon with your mind, but you can only feel it with your being." He turned to her, his voice now gentler. "Zen is not the map. It's the walk. It is not a thought. It is the pause between thoughts, and the heart knows how to pause." He didn't explain further. That night, Mira didn't write in her journal, didn't open her books. She sat by the koi pond, watching the ripples move like breath. For the first time, she didn't try to describe what she was feeling. She didn't even try to feel anything. She just stopped trying, and something she didn't know what quietly arrived. It wasn't a revelation. It wasn't bliss. It was a small shift, like the weight of a stone lifted from her ribs, like the scent of childhood returning for no reason. In the following days, Mira did the same tasks, but differently. She still carried water, but she noticed the weight, the coolness, the trail it left on her sleeve. She still swept, but now she could hear the broom whisper across stone. Her mind still offered commentary, but her heart had begun to whisper, too. And when she listened from that place, not to understand, but to be, even silence began to speak. One morning, Anju passed her in the hallway. He stopped briefly and said, "You've started walking?" Mira blinked. "I thought I'd been walking all along." He smiled. "No, before. You were thinking about the path. Now, your feet are touching it. We live in a world that prizes intellect, that rewards analysis. And there is beauty in thought, in clarity, in logic, in language. But there are truths too large for thought. There are songs the brain can't sing. The mind can observe grief, but only the heart can kneel beside it. The mind can describe love, but only the heart can tremble when it arrives. And in the same way, you can learn everything about awakening, its history, its methods, its metaphors, and still miss it, because you never let it reach your chest. So tonight, ask gently, am I walking the path, or thinking about the path? Am I trying to grasp truth, or letting it touch me? Can I set down the map, just for a while, and feel the grass under my soles? This is not about abandoning knowledge. It's about letting knowledge bow so that presence can rise. Close your eyes, not to escape, but to arrive. Place your hand on your chest, not as a gesture, but as a remembering. You are not here to master stillness. You are here to remember that you already are it. When you stop trying to be, there was a moment, not grand, not marked by ceremony, when Rowan realized he didn't know how to be quiet anymore. He had spent most of his life chasing clarity. He was the kind of person who had an answer for everything, a quote for every situation, a framework for every emotion. He built a self around knowing, around being useful, around being right. But one evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by books and bookmarked pages, he noticed something odd. The silence didn't comfort him. It made him restless. And beneath that restlessness was a quiet sadness, as if something sacred had been buried under all his certainty. He tried to explain it to a friend. I just don't know what else to read, he said. Nothing feels new. The friend, a quiet woman named Tess, simply replied, maybe the answer isn't more. That night, Rowan dreamed of a room with no furniture, no windows, just a single candle and the sound of his own breath. When he woke, the air felt different, as if something within him had been waiting, patiently, for him to notice the space between thoughts. So he packed a few things and traveled north, to a retreat that Tess had once whispered about, a place tucked in trees, where silence wasn't a punishment, but a path. When he arrived, the woman who opened the door didn't ask him anything. She just nodded, offered him a cushion, and motioned toward the hall of stillness. Inside, people sat, some with eyes closed, some with tears. No chants, no bells, just breathing, just presence. For the first 3 days, Rowan struggled. His mind was a machine that wouldn't stop spinning. He narrated everything, judged everything. Even his own discomfort became content to analyze. He would think, this is the resistance people talk about. I must be close to breakthrough. And then, thinking about resistance is resistance. I need to stop. And then I'm thinking about thinking again. On and on it went. Until one afternoon, something small happened. He was sitting on the edge of the garden, watching a dragonfly hover above a pond. It darted, dipped, disappeared for just a few seconds. Rowan forgot to name it. He didn't think. That's a dragonfly. He didn't remember the poem he'd once read about still water. He didn't reach for meaning. He just watched, and something in him released. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't enlightenment. It was more like returning to the breath you didn't know you were holding. That evening, during silent tea, he sat next to the retreat's teacher, an old man with kind eyes and fingers stained from working in the garden. Rowan whispered, I think I had a moment today, but I don't know what it means. The teacher smiled without looking up. "Then you're already free." Rowan blinked. "But don't I need to understand it?" The teacher set his cup down gently. "When you sit at the edge of the ocean," he said, "do you need to understand every wave to feel the breeze?" Rowan didn't answer, and that silence was enough. In the days that followed, he stopped chasing insight. He stopped trying to capture peace like a photograph. He walked slowly, listened to the birds without translating their song. He didn't try to be present. He simply let himself arrive. Sometimes, he still reached for thoughts, but now, when they came, he noticed them the way you notice leaves drifting by on a river. Not enemies, not teachers, just movement. One morning, a visiting monk asked him what he had learned so far. Rowan paused. "I don't know," he said softly. "And I think that's the lesson?" The monk laughed gently. "Beautiful. The moment we think we know, the gate closes. But when we admit we don't, everything becomes a door. There's a kind of strength in letting go of knowing, in loosening the grip on expertise, not because knowledge is wrong, but because it's only half the picture. The other half is quiet, is the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, is the kind of space that allows something unnamed to enter, not to teach, but to touch. Tonight, as you listen, maybe you feel that same restlessness, that subtle urge to figure this out. But what if you didn't? What if, just for these next few minutes, you allowed the words to float past, not to hold, not to apply, not to remember. Just let them drift, like mist through trees, like petals in water, like breath returning home. Ask yourself, what am I still trying to understand? Instead of simply experiencing, what would it feel like to put the book down, to let the question remain open, to let the heart feel without explanation? You are not failing when you don't understand. You are arriving in the pause, in the breath, in the tender space between thoughts. That, too, is enough. There are some truths the mouth cannot carry, some understandings too tender for words to hold, and sometimes the only way to know is to taste. There was once a boy named Luca. He had never seen a mountain before. All his life was spent in a flat, dusty city where even the sunrise felt hurried. But something in him longed for stillness, not quiet. Exactly. But something beneath quiet. A silence that hummed instead of echoed. One summer, when the weight of his own questions grew too heavy to carry, Luca left the city behind. He didn't know what he was looking for. He only knew that logic no longer comforted him, and language had grown too sharp. He traveled far, until one morning he arrived at a temple carved into a hillside, where the wind smelled like pine and firewood. He was greeted by an old woman named Lynn, who lived there with only a dog and a kettle that seemed always on the boil. Lynn said little. She showed him a place to sleep, then motioned toward the garden. "Here," she said softly. "We touch the world first, then speak if needed." And so, each day, Luca worked. He weeded, he carried water, he learned the rhythm of chopping wood and lighting fires. He tried to quiet his mind, but it ran in circles. He tried to still his breath, but it stumbled. He asked Lynn questions about truth, about freedom, about the nature of awakening. Her answers were always short. Sometimes, just a smile. Sometimes, a tilt of the head, but never what he expected. He grew frustrated. "Why won't you explain?" he asked one afternoon, standing in the doorway with dirt on his hands. "I've read books. I know the concepts, but I don't feel it. Why won't you just tell me what's real?" Lynn looked at him, walked to the small table, poured tea into a single ceramic cup, and without a word, handed it to him. He took it, confused. "It's just tea," he said. She nodded. "Yes, just tea." He looked down, then brought the cup to his lips, and something happened. The warmth, the earthiness, the way the rim of the cup rested against his mouth, the way the steam curled into his face, the silence between them, all of it wordless, immediate, true. And he understood, not as a thought, but as a presence. He looked up, eyes glassy. Lynn smiled. "Now you know," she said. "No theory, no diagram. Just one simple act, a moment of direct contact." He drank slowly, not because it was hot, but because something sacred was in that slowness. He wasn't sipping tea. He was meeting the world, not through explanation, but sensation, not through logic, but experience. For the rest of his stay, Luca asked fewer questions, not because he stopped caring, but because he finally saw that not all questions need answers. Some just need attention. One morning, as he prepared to leave, he stood with Lynn by the edge of the path. The kettle steamed behind her, humming like it always had. "I don't have the words," he said. She nodded. "Good. Sometimes, the deepest knowing is silent. In the modern world, we're taught to explain everything: our feelings, our dreams, even our healing. We reach for language like a shield, but some moments dissolve the need for description. The warmth of a hand held in grief. The breath caught when watching the ocean meet the sky. The pause after a child's laugh. The taste of tea when nothing else is asked of you. These are not metaphors. They are reality more real than thought. Zen invites us into direct experience, not commentary, not analysis, but the raw, tender truth of being alive, with no filter. And when we meet life that way, the world doesn't just change, it reveals itself. So tonight, as you listen, maybe place one hand over your chest. Feel its warmth. Don't describe it. Don't narrate it. Just meet it. Maybe sip something warm, not as a ritual, but as a return. Let the cup touch your lips like a whisper. Let your breath slow. And no, not with your mind, but with your presence that this simple act is enough. There's a story whispered through the corridors of an old temple in the hills of Kyoto. It is said that once, many years ago, a young novice named Hiro arrived at the temple gates with fire in his chest. He wasn't loud. He didn't shout, but his eyes held a storm, and his jaw clenched like a gate refusing to open. No one asked him why he came. The monks simply welcomed him, offered him robes, and assigned him to morning bell duty. Each dawn, Hiro would rise before the sun. He would walk barefoot to the bell tower and strike the great bronze bell 3 times. It was meant to be a call not to worship, but to presence, not to duty, but to breath. But Hiro's strikes were harsh, too hard, too fast. The sound that rang through the valley wasn't soft or sacred. It was jarring, like a shout across silence. The head monk, Master Kenji, listened each morning and said nothing. Days passed. then weeks, until one morning, Hiro struck the bell so violently that a crack formed near its base. The sound it gave was warped, sharp, aching. That afternoon, Master Kenji called Hiro to the garden. They sat beneath a maple tree. The leaves were red with the weight of early autumn. "You struck the bell too hard," the master said gently. Hiro looked down. "I didn't mean to." Kenji nodded. "Yet, you did." Hiro clenched his fists. "I have anger. It's always there." The master was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What did the bell do to you?" "Nothing," Hiro muttered. "Then why did you hit it like it had wronged you?" Hiro blinked. Kenji leaned closer, voice softer than the breeze. "The bell only returns what you give it. The echo you hear is not from the bell. It is from you." Hiro's chest tightened. "The same," the master continued, "is true with people, with the world. What echoes back is often what we send out, even when we don't see it." He stood slowly, brushing leaves from his robe. "You do not need to silence your anger, but you must learn to hear it before it becomes sound." That night, Hiro couldn't sleep. He thought of the bell, the way it shivered under his hand, the way its tone had changed, and he wondered how often had he struck others the same way. With words, with silence, with the armor of being right. The next morning, Hiro still rang the bell, but slower, with less force. He listened not just to the sound, but to the space around it, the space inside it, and slowly, something in him began to shift. He didn't stop being angry, but he began to see the anger before it moved. Years later, Hiro became a teacher. When students came to him full of emotion, he didn't offer techniques first. He offered a bell and said, "Strike it how you feel." Some hit it hard, some too soft, some hesitated, and always. He asked, "What do you hear in your own echo in the modern world?" We are trained to react, to defend, to explain. But Zen teaches us something gentler. Pause. Notice the sound before it is made. Feel the hand before it strikes. Listen to what the world reflects, back not to blame it, but to understand the shape of our own vibration. Anger is not wrong. It is not evil. It is a bell, and when we strike it unconsciously, we fill the air with noise. But when we meet it with awareness, it becomes a teacher. It shows us where we hurt, where we fear, where we are not yet free. Tonight, ask yourself softly, what echoes are returning to me? Are they sharp? Are they hollow? Are they loud because I am shouting inside? And what would happen if I just listened, not to judge, not to fix, but to feel? Maybe place one hand over your heart, the other on your belly, and breathe, not to calm down, but to welcome what is already here, without striking. Let the bell be still. Let your breath be enough. And to listen, not to the sound, but to the silence that follows. That, too, is part of you. In the quiet curve of a forest path, where mist hugged the soil and birds whispered secrets, there stood a maple tree, not grand, not ancient, just present. Its leaves were wide, amber-tipped, trembling gently with the breath of the mountain. Each year, as the air cooled, the villagers watched the tree. They believed its rhythm signaled the shift of seasons. A quiet oracle in crimson and gold. But one year, as frost began to paint the earth, and nearby trees had already stood bare in surrender. The maple remained full. Its leaves, rich with autumn fire, refused to fall. They held on, long past the first snow. Even the wind, which had swept others clean, seemed to hush as it passed the maple, as if asking permission. Children pointed. Elders wondered. Some said it was stubborn. Others said it was wise. But the tree did not answer. It simply stood, still, and waiting. Among the villagers was a girl named Elia. Small, quiet, curious in the way water is gentle, but persistent. She visited the tree daily, watching. She spoke to it as children often do to those who don't speak back, not expecting response, but sensing company. One morning, she pressed her ear gently to the bark and whispered, "Why haven't you let go?" She waited. The silence stretched, and then a breeze stirred the lowest branch. A single leaf fluttered, not fallen, just dancing. And though there were no words, something in her body understood, because she, too, was not ready to let go. Her father had left the village weeks ago, promising to return, but his steps had grown quiet, and the ache of his absence felt like a question, without language. People had told her to move on, to be strong, to let time do its work, but her heart still held. And now, this tree, this beautiful, stubborn tree was saying without saying, it's okay to hold on a little longer. So she sat beneath its canopy, day after day, not to fix, not to force, just to be with something that, like her, was still in the middle of its becoming. As the days passed, the tree did change. Slowly, not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly. Some leaves released at night, slipping gently into snow. Others floated down in sunlight, twirling like soft decisions. And one morning, Aaliyah looked up and noticed there were fewer leaves, but the tree had not rushed. It had waited for its own time, and in that waiting, it had taught her something more powerful than any instruction. Later, she would tell her grandmother, "I used to think letting go was something we had to do all at once, like dropping a heavy bag. But now I think it's more like leaves, one at a time. When they're ready, we live in a culture that moves quickly. We're taught to shed pain on command, to forgive before we're done feeling, to act as if release is a switch instead of a season. But in truth, some parts of us are like leaves clinging not from weakness, but from rhythm, from the quiet truth that we are still becoming, still learning, still gathering courage to loosen our grip. Letting go is not a race. It is not a demand. It is an unfolding. And sometimes we are not late. We are simply slow, beautifully, tenderly, slow. So, tonight, ask gently, what am I being told to let go of before I'm ready? What have I judged myself for still holding? Can I allow that part of me to stay just a little longer, not in resistance, but in reverence? Because even holding can be sacred, even clinging can be a form of listening. Let your breath be the wind. Let your heart be the branch. Let your tenderness be the leaf. And know when it is time, it will fall, not with pain, but with grace. Until then, let yourself be the tree. She sat down expecting stillness. She had read about it, heard about it, dreamt of it. the kind of quiet that wraps around you like warm light, the kind of peace that blooms in the belly and melts the walls we build around ourselves. But the truth that met her was far less romantic. The moment Maya closed her eyes, the noise got louder. Her knees complained. Her mind spun with lists. Her heart reminded her of people she missed, words she regretted, things she didn't know how to fix. She opened her eyes. The room hadn't changed, but something inside her whispered, "This isn't what I was promised." She had come to meditation with hope, the kind of hope that seeks escape. But what she found was herself, not the calm self she had imagined, the real self, the one with edges and ache and stories still unresolved. For a while, she resisted. She tried harder, sat longer, focused more. She tried mantras, mudras, soft music, guided visualizations. She lit candles and rearranged her cushions. Still, the noise stayed, until one morning, after a particularly frustrating session, she whispered, "I give up." And then she breathed, not to fix anything, not to prove anything, just because she was still alive, still breathing, still here. And for the first time, she didn't fight the experience. She met it. No judgment, no goals, just presence. That moment changed everything, not because it felt perfect, but because it felt true. Meditation, she began to realize, wasn't about becoming ideal. It was about becoming honest, not quieting the mind so it could meet some spiritual standard, but meeting the mind exactly where it was tired, tangled, tender. She began to show up differently. Instead of trying to do it right, she let the practice be what it was, a sitting down with herself, whatever that meant that day. Some days it meant crying. Other days it meant boredom. Sometimes it was breath. Other times it was just sitting in the mess of her thoughts and remembering she didn't need to run. Her teacher once said, "The point is not to escape the self. It's to become so familiar with it. It no longer frightens you." And slowly, Maya began to understand what that meant. She stopped chasing peace like it was somewhere else. She stopped trying to transcend her humanity. And instead, she allowed it to be sacred. The ache in her chest, sacred. The wandering thoughts, sacred. The raw truth of showing up, even when it was hard, sacred. She was no longer trying to be a good meditator. She was just learning how to be with herself, without turning away. That was the practice. That was the path. Meditation is often misunderstood. People think it means silencing the mind, clearing all thoughts, achieving a perfect state of bliss. But real meditation is much more humble. It's sitting on a cushion or a chair and letting the truth be exactly as it is. No fixing, no editing, no pretending. It's welcoming whatever arises with gentleness. It's remembering that the goal is not to feel nothing, but to feel everything without needing to control it. We don't meditate to become better versions of ourselves. We meditate to become more ourselves, the full, unfiltered, beautifully flawed version that is already worthy. We meditate not to achieve silence, but to become friends with the noise. Tonight, maybe your practice doesn't look like you hoped. Maybe your thoughts are loud. Maybe your body hurts. Maybe your emotions feel too big to hold. But what if that's okay? What if the purpose is not to change your experience, but to greet it? What if the real peace isn't in the silence, but in the soft willingness to stay? So sit, not because you're calm, but because you care. Sit, not because you've figured it all out, but because you're learning how to be with the not knowing. Sit and breathe. Let this moment be exactly what it is. Not a lesson, not a performance, not a path to enlightenment. Just a meeting. You and you. No mask, no effort, just presence. And in that presence, there is already healing. There is already grace. There is already enough. There was once a gardener named Theo who lived at the edge of a small town where the sky seemed wider and the winds moved slower. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wise in the way books speak of wisdom, but he knew how to listen to things most people ignored. He listened to soil, to roots, to the way leaves curled before they let go. Each autumn, he would sit in his garden at dawn, surrounded by trees surrendering their color to the ground. People often asked him why he didn't rake the leaves immediately. "Isn't it messy?" they'd say. But Theo would smile gently. "I don't clean what's not finished falling." Then, he'd lean close to the earth and whisper, "Let it rest. Something new is already on its way." He understood something many forget. Falling is not the end. It is the beginning, in disguise. The tree doesn't mourn its leaves. It lets them go so that, later, something else can rise. Something tender. Something new. Something that wouldn't have room to grow if the old stayed forever. This, too, is how our inner seasons move. Sometimes, we hold on to things long past their time, relationships, beliefs, versions of ourselves that once felt right, but now feel tight. We tell ourselves letting go means loss, but the truth is softer. Letting go is not rejection, it's preparation. The space you create by shedding is the very ground your future will root into. Theo once told a young visitor, a boy named Liam, "Seeds don't grow in clutter. They need soil that's been cleared by courage." The boy asked, "Does it hurt the tree to lose so much?" Theo nodded slowly. "Yes, even trees feel change, but they don't resist it. They trust what comes next." The boy looked up at a bare branch, even if they don't know what it is. Especially then, Theo whispered, "This is the sacred rhythm of all things. Die, so you can live again. Release, so something deeper can take its place. Let go, not because you must, but because life needs space to breathe." One winter, a storm broke a branch from Theo's favorite tree. He found it lying in the snow split, but still holding a single bud. He took it inside, placed it in a jar of water, and waited. Weeks passed. Then one morning, against all odds, the bud opened. Tiny, green, alive. He didn't cry, but something inside him did. He called it proof that even in the harshest season, something soft survives. That growth isn't always loud. Sometimes it happens silently, in the dark. So if tonight you find yourself grieving something you've let go, a part of yourself you once cherished, a dream you couldn't carry forward, know this: you are not empty. You are clearing space. You are not lost. You are opening. Just like the tree, you may feel bare, but beneath the bark, beneath the surface, beneath the stories, something is already preparing to bloom. The next version of you doesn't come when you force it. It comes when the old you has finished falling, and that cannot be rushed. So be gentle with your becoming, with your grief, with the winter between chapters. The world may ask you to move on quickly, to tidy up, to appear fine, but you can choose a different pace, the pace of petals, of slow thaw, of truth. Let the leaves fall. Let them rest. Let the ground receive what you no longer need. And then wait, not with fear, but with faith. The tree does not beg spring to come. It trusts. And in that trust, something miraculous happens. Tonight, place your hand over your chest, not to calm it, but to remind it the shedding was never a failure. It was the invitation to grow again. And you will. You already are. Sometimes, we want to bloom while still holding winter in our bones. But the branches cannot carry both snow and blossoms. The burden must be released. Theo understood this too, in his last season, as his hands grew slower and breath grew thinner. He still sat outside, wrapped in wool, watching his garden yield to frost. He whispered to the wind, "I have let go enough. Now something new will grow, not from my hands, but from the space I've left behind." After he passed, no one tended his garden for months. But then, in spring, the soil stirred. Little green shoots emerged. Seeds he had tucked into the earth long ago began to awaken. Flowers returned where no one had planted them. His absence, filled with quiet preparation, had become fertile ground, and the people understood. Letting go doesn't mean we disappear. It means we leave room. Room for healing. Room for others. Room for what's next. So if you are in a season of release, trust that something unseen is already taking root. Your letting go is not an end. It is your beginning, becoming visible. Breathe in. Let fall what must. And wait. Spring always comes. There was a man once who walked through every storm without an umbrella. Rain didn't bother him. Cold didn't stop him. And when people asked why he never ran for shelter, he would only smile. Because some things need to fall freely. His name was Julian. He lived by the sea, alone in a weather-beaten house, where the sound of crashing waves blended with his heartbeat. He was not lonely, though he often walked alone. And sometimes, he cried. Not because he was broken, not because he needed fixing, but because the rain knew how to hold grief better than any hand. On one particularly gray afternoon, a passerby saw Julian standing at the shoreline, soaked, unmoving, tears mixed with rain. The stranger, concerned, approached and asked, "Are you all right?" Julian turned slowly, eyes quiet. He nodded. "I'm just letting it rain where it needs to." He wasn't referring only to the sky. Sorrow, you see, is not a mistake. It is not a detour, not a sign of failure. It is weather. It moves through. It changes the shape of the landscape, not by force, but by presence. Too often, we hide from it, mask it, numb it, shame it. But what if, like Julian, we stood with it, let it fall, let it soften us, let it cleanse what pride tried to protect? Crying in the rain is not weakness. It is permission. Permission to feel what the world told us to swallow. Permission to be human, not heroic. Permission to let go, not as surrender, but as sacred return. Julian once told a child. You know, the rain never asks you to explain. It just falls, and it hopes you'll walk with it. What if sadness is the same? What if it doesn't need to be solved, only seen? What if the purpose of sorrow is not to paralyze us, but to soften us, not to defeat us, but to deepen us? There are days when we try to distract ourselves from grief with noise. We bury it under tasks, wrap it in jokes, push it aside with rationalizations. But emotions don't disappear just because they're ignored. They become echoes. They haunt the quiet corners. They whisper behind laughter. True healing only begins when we allow ourselves to feel fully, unedited, unjustified. Julian knew this, and so he gave his sorrow time to breathe, time to weep, time to become rain, because he had learned tears are not a sign of weakness. They are a release, a reckoning, a river returning home. There's an old saying, tears are prayers that travel to where words cannot, and sometimes they are the only language sorrow understands. So if tonight you feel heavy, not from anything specific, but from everything all at once, know this: you are allowed to cry. You are allowed to sit with your sadness without needing to name it. You are allowed to grieve what never happened, what should have happened, what might never be. You are allowed to feel deeply because you live deeply. You are not too sensitive. You are not too much. You are human, and grief is holy. It means you cared. It means you dreamed. It means you dared to love in a world that does not always know how to hold love gently. There's strength in tears that never touches muscle. There's power in stillness that never makes a sound. When Julian cried, it wasn't just for himself. It was for the world, for every goodbye that came too soon, for every silence that should have been filled, for every heart that cracked quietly. His tears watered the soil of his soul, and in time, something beautiful grew there: compassion, depth, wisdom, not because he avoided the storm, but because he walked through it and stayed soft. So if tonight you find yourself crying, whether alone or in the arms of rain, know that you are not unraveling. You are remembering what matters, what hurts, what still hopes. Let it rain. Let it soak the masks. Let it blur the expectations. Let it remind you you are alive. And this ache means you have not given up. It means your heart is still listening, still opening, still brave enough to break. And from that break comes light. Julian never tried to outrun his sadness. He didn't ask it to explain itself. He didn't demand it leave faster. He welcomed it. And through that welcome, he found peace, not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of grace within it. Tonight, may you find the same. May your tears not be something you hide, but something you honor. Because to cry truly is to trust that what aches now will one day bloom, not in spite of your sorrow, but because of it. Let it rain. You are safe. You are sacred. You are becoming whole. One tear at a time. There was once a young woman named Elira who came to a mountain retreat with eyes full of fear. Not the trembling kind, the kind that hides behind control, the kind that smiles too much, laughs too loud, and always volunteers to clean the dishes just to avoid being still. She didn't come because she loved meditation. She came because running had stopped working. on her first day. She asked the teacher, "Will this help me get rid of the pain?" He didn't answer. He simply pointed to a cushion, and so she sat. But the silence did not feel safe. It felt loud, unbearably loud. Inside that quiet, everything she had avoided began to whisper. Old wounds, unspoken grief, loneliness she thought she'd left behind. She wanted to get up, to walk away, to escape. But something softer than pride kept her there. So she stayed. Not out of discipline, out of exhaustion, out of the quiet, knowing that she could no longer outrun what lived inside her. Day after day, she returned to the cushion, not to fight the pain, but to sit with it, to let it breathe, to let it speak, to let it be real. There were no miracles, only moments of trembling, of release, of deep, quiet meeting. And over time, the pain began to change shape, not because it disappeared, but because it was finally allowed to exist. You see, suffering that is denied becomes a shadow. It follows you, haunts you, pulls at the corners of your joy. But suffering that is welcomed becomes a doorway, a place of passage, a teacher. Elira learned that pain does not grow larger when faced. It grows sharper when feared. And so she softened. She stopped demanding healing happen fast. She stopped asking the pain to prove its worth. She simply said, "You're here. I see you. Sit with me." And something extraordinary happened. The pain sat down. It did not attack. It did not consume. It simply rested. Because sometimes, pain is not asking to be solved. It is asking to be witnessed. We are taught from a young age to fix work. But real healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with presence, with the quiet courage to stay in the room when the ache grows loud, to stay with the breath when the memories rise, to stay with yourself gently, honestly, fully, even when it's hard, especially then. The teacher once told Elira, meditation is not about escaping the fire. It is about learning how to sit at the center of it and not burn. And she began to understand. Pain is not the enemy. It is the messenger. It carries stories we haven't told, truths we haven't claimed, parts of ourselves we've exiled, and it will keep knocking until we open the door. So tonight, if something inside you aches, don't rush to silence it. Don't scold it for still being there. Sit down beside it. Ask it what it needs. Let it cry, if it must. Let it speak, if it can. Let it be without editing. You do not need to be strong right now. You need to be soft. Because softness is where healing begins. The world may ask you to move on quickly, to smile, to carry on, to pretend, but you can choose differently. You can choose to sit down with your sorrow, to breathe with it, to give it a place at your table. Not because you're weak, but because you're ready. Ready to meet yourself in full. Ready to stop abandoning the parts of you that still hurt. Ready to remember that healing is not about erasing pain. It's about transforming your relationship with it. And that transformation, it begins here, with one breath, one moment, one quiet act of radical tenderness. Elira stayed at the retreat for 3 weeks. When she left, her pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer terrified her. She walked differently, not lighter, but steadier, because she had learned something most people never do. Pain is not a sign you're broken. It's a sign you're feeling, and feeling is the beginning of becoming whole. There was once a ceramic artist named Hana who lived in a quiet village where the rivers ran slow and the sky always seemed to hum with a gentle kind of silence. Her hands were her greatest teachers. They understood fragility. They understood patience. She made bowls, hundreds of them all shaped by breath, heat, and her quiet devotion, each one unique, each one delicate. One day, after months of work, Hana prepared a set of bowls for an upcoming festival. She placed them gently on a wooden table by the window, where the sunlight touched their glazed skin with reverence. But that evening, a tremor moved through the earth. It wasn't violent, just enough to shift the world slightly, enough to send all her bowls to the ground, every one of them broken. She knelt down, barefoot, heart echoing louder than the quake, and gathered the shards into her lap, sharp, cold, unforgiving. Her hands trembled, her chest hollowed. All that time, all that care, gone in an instant. And yet, she didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply sat there, surrounded by the pieces, because something inside her knew this was not the end of the story. The next morning, instead of discarding the broken pieces, Hana began to study them, not with grief, with curiosity. She noticed how the cracks ran like rivers, how they formed new patterns, how, despite the break, the clay still held memory. She remembered a practice she had once read about, kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, not to hide the cracks, but to illuminate them, to fill them with something precious, to make the broken beautiful. And so she began, carefully, patiently. She mixed lacquer with powdered gold. She traced each fracture, not as a flaw, but as a map of what had happened, a map of survival. Piece by piece, she rebuilt the bowls, not into what they once were, but into something more, something stronger, something softer, something radiant. People from the village came to see her creations, and they were silent, awed not by the gold, but by what the gold represented: resilience, integration, healing. Each bowl whispered, "I was broken, and now I am more." This is what kintsugi teaches us, that brokenness is not the end, that pain is not a sentence, that cracks are sacred. We live in a world obsessed with perfection, smooth surfaces, flawless stories, unblemished lives. But real life is made of breaks, moments when the earthquake comes and we fall, moments when we are no longer who we were, but not yet who we will be. And it is in these moments, these fragile in-betweens, that the gold has a chance to enter, not to erase the pain, but to honor it, to say this mattered, this hurt, this changed me, and still, I am here, still whole, still holding, still capable of beauty. The cracks, filled with gold, do not make the bowl weaker. They make it priceless. Because now, it tells a story of rupture, a story of return, a story of grace. Hana never sold those bowls. She kept them in her studio, not as trophies, as reminders that what breaks us can also bless us if we choose to stay, to feel, to mend, to shine. So if you are carrying pieces right now, shards of what you once trusted, what you once dreamed, what you once were, hold them gently. You don't have to glue them back immediately. You don't have to force the repair. Just sit with them, trace the lines, name what cracked, listen to what still echoes through the brokenness. And when you're ready, not when others say you should be, begin to gather your gold. Not the kind you wear, the kind you become. Your courage, your compassion, your choice to begin again. This is the real art, not of pretending you were never broken, but of learning how to glow, because you were. Let your pain be part of your beauty. Let your scars speak of your strength. Let your story shimmer, not in spite of what hurt, but because of it. You are not ruined. You are reformed. And the gold you carry now, it's in your breath, in your tenderness, in your truth. Tonight, whisper to your cracks, you are where the light comes in, and let that be enough. There once lived a glassblower named Rowan in a town where the sky turned lavender at dusk, and the river spoke softly to the stones. His studio was filled with fragile things, flutes of light, globes that shimmered like tears, ornaments that held stories in their curves. Each morning, he lit the furnace not just to shape glass, but to remember that beauty, like fire, needs courage to exist. He believed in precision, in stillness, in the exact moment when heat became form. But one afternoon, while carrying a tray of newly finished pieces, his foot caught on a loose stone near the door, and just like that, every piece fell. The sound was unbearable, like stars breaking, like memories shattering on tile. He didn't move, didn't scream, just stood there, surrounded by what used to be. Customers came by later, offering sympathy. Maybe you can remake them, one asked. Throw away the broken bits. Another suggested, start fresh. But Rowan shook his head. No, he said quietly. They deserve more than the trash. That night, he swept the fragments gently into a wooden box, not to forget them, but to listen. Over the next days, he did not return to the furnace. Instead, he laid out each shard on his workbench not to weep over them, but to see them, truly see them. He noticed how the breaks made new edges, how the colors refracted differently now, how light caught the jagged glass and danced, and something stirred in him, not grief, not regret, but possibility. What if this wasn't an accident? What if the breaking wasn't destruction? What if it was transformation? Rowan began to experiment. He fused the fragments together, not to hide the cracks, but to shape new forms from them. He melted gold into the seams. He created windows, panels, even sculpture, all built from what had once been deemed broken. And the results, they were more luminous than anything he had made before, because the light didn't just pass through them. It refracted, it scattered, it sang. What had shattered now shimmered. Visitors came and wept at the sight, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, because they, too, had felt broken, and now they could see not in metaphor, but in glass that breaking is not the end. It is the beginning of light. We are taught to fear the moment of breaking, to avoid it, to hide it, to cover it with newness as fast as possible. But Rowan's story tells us this: shattering doesn't mean you've failed. It means something could no longer hold its shape. And maybe it wasn't meant to. Maybe something softer, truer, more luminous wants to emerge, but it needs space. And sometimes, space is only made when the old falls apart. So if your heart feels fractured, if your dreams lie scattered, if your past lies like glass on the floor, breathe. This is not the end. This is the beginning of how you shine. Not like before, but brighter. Because now, your light has direction. Now, it's shaped by where you've been. Rowan once told a girl who had just lost someone she loved, when the bowl breaks, it doesn't forget how to hold. It learns to hold differently. So maybe your break isn't about loss. Maybe it's about becoming a vessel for something new. New love, new wisdom, new tenderness. You are not broken. You are becoming. And the light that will one day pour through you, it's already gathering, already waiting, already remembering the shape of who you're meant to be. Tonight, gather your pieces, not to judge them, but to bless them. Each one carries a part of your becoming. Each one has held something sacred. Each one is still worthy. You do not need to be whole to shine. You only need to be willing to show up, to soften, to begin again with gold in your hands and courage in your chest. Because even the sky breaks open each night, and still, we call that beauty. Still, we call it dawn, in a quiet valley where clouds moved slow like thoughts in prayer. There lived an old midwife named Mira. She no longer delivered babies. Now, she delivered silence to those who came to her not to be born, but to be reborn. People didn't knock on her door in celebration. They came in pieces, in grief, in silence that trembled. And Mira welcomed them with only one phrase: sit here and bring your ache with you. She never asked them to explain, because she knew healing doesn't start with words. It starts with willingness. One afternoon, a young man named Eli came to her cabin. His hands shook, not from cold, but from holding something too long, too tightly. "I've come to forget," he said. Mira only smiled. "Then we begin by remembering." He looked confused. "I want to move past this, not stay with it." She poured tea. "You cannot move through what you refuse to hold." He stayed, unsure why. Maybe because his pain needed a witness. Maybe because he had finally run out of ways to run. Each day, Mira gave no advice, no mantras, no rescue, only space. Space to cry, to tremble, to say things not out loud, but with breath. And Eli began to change, not dramatically, not loudly, but slowly. He began to sit with his sorrow as one would sit beside an old friend. He stopped hating his grief. He started hearing it. And what he heard surprised him. It didn't scream. It whispered. It said, "Thank you for not leaving me alone anymore." Mira once told him, "Wounds don't close because you cover them. They close because you cradle them." That was the lesson. That healing doesn't come from pretending the hurt isn't there. It comes from holding the hurt, like something sacred. We are taught to push away pain, to label it negative, to numb it, to escape. But in truth, pain is not poison. It is presence. A part of us calling out, "See me, feel me, love me," when we turn away. It grows louder. When we turn toward, it begins to soften. Eli learned that healing was not about fixing himself. It was about making room for sorrow, for shame, for stories he had buried. And in that room, that inner cradle, something happened. He didn't forget the pain, but he forgave it. He forgave himself for having it, for carrying it, for being human. That was the healing, not the removal, the reconciliation, the reunion, the gentle act of saying to every broken part, "You can stay. I won't cast you out." And in time, those parts stopped flinching. They relaxed. They breathed. They began to trust. We often wait for pain to leave before we can live again. But the truth is, life returns the moment we stop turning away. The moment we say, "This hurts, and still, I will sit beside it," like Mira sat beside so many, like trees sit with snow in winter, like the moon sits with the night. To heal is not to forget. It is to remember in softer ways, to hold the ache without judgment, to make it part of the tapestry, not a stain to be scrubbed. Eli stayed with Mira for many weeks, and when he left, he was not brand new, but he was honest. He was whole, not in the way that means perfect, but in the way that means complete. He carried his pain differently now, not as a burden, but as a companion. He knew it would visit again, but he also knew this. When it did, he wouldn't close the door. He'd put on tea. He'd sit. He'd say, "Welcome. I remember you. Let's breathe together." That is healing, not a cure, a commitment to stay, to soften, to hold, not hide. Tonight, if you feel something stirring a grief you tried to forget, a regret that still breathes beneath your skin, do not silence it. Sit. Let it come close. Ask it what it needs, and then give it presence. You don't need answers. You need arms, your own, wrapped around the places that still tremble. Chua lan hong jen, tu tran ne, no jen tu om up, tu an ma diu dang nhin vao noi jiao, tu loi, tidam voi chin, min, emon kichua on. You are not too much. You are not too late. You are exactly where healing begins here, in the gentle courage to stay with what aches. And from that stillness, light grows. Not loud, not fast, but real and lasting. Let that be enough. In a small alley behind a quiet tea house, there lived a cat named Nilo. He wasn't owned. He wasn't wild. He simply was. Each morning, the shopkeeper placed a small bowl of milk near the back door. And each morning, Nilo appeared. Not at the same time. Not with urgency. He came when he came. He drank if he was thirsty. He left when he was done. But sometimes, he just sat, not waiting, not watching, just being. Many patrons noticed him. A few called out. Some tried to coax him closer. Children offered bits of food. But Nilo rarely moved. He would sit beneath the wooden bench, tail wrapped around his feet, eyes half closed, still as stone. Is he waiting for something a child once asked? No. The shopkeeper smiled. He's just sitting. It confused people. To do something without purpose, to rest without a reason, in a world addicted to forward, to effort, to arrival. Nilo became a quiet rebellion. He sat in the sunlight, in the rain, under the moon. And whether a dish appeared or not, whether someone came or didn't, he remained the same, present, poised, peaceful. The shopkeeper came to love this rhythm. It reminded him of tea, how it's best when not rushed, how its fragrance rises only when given time. And so he began to mirror Nilo. In the mornings, before customers came, he'd sit by the back door too, not to plan, not to prepare, but simply to sit. And something shifted. The days felt softer. The breath came easier. Even the tea tasted different, more alive, more whole. One rainy afternoon, a traveler sought shelter in the tea house. He was anxious, worn from the road, always glancing at his watch. He noticed Nilo outside dry beneath the eaves, unmoving. "What's he doing?" he asked. "Nothing," the shopkeeper said. The man frowned. "He must be waiting for something." "No," the shopkeeper smiled. "He's just here." The man stared through the window. "That's strange. Only because we've forgotten how." The shopkeeper replied, "How to sit without seeking, how to breathe without chasing, how to be without proving. We are so used to attaching value to motion, to outcome, to productivity. We think stillness is laziness, that silence is emptiness, that pausing is failure. But Nilo taught otherwise. He was the poem with no rhyme, the pause in a song that gives the melody space, the unmoving center from which life moves. And he never tried to teach. He just sat until those who noticed remembered what it meant to stop running, to let the moment unfold, to drop the grasping, even for peace, even for enlightenment. There's a story in the old Zen tradition. A student asked the master, "What is enlightenment?" The master pointed to a cat washing its paws. The student didn't understand, but now, maybe, we do. Because Nilo wasn't waiting for anything to change. He was the change. He didn't need to reach stillness. He was stillness, not practiced, embodied, and in that presence, soft. Unassuming, he offered something more powerful than words, a reminder that now is enough, that presence is enough, that you, as you are enough. The traveler stayed an hour longer than planned. He drank his tea slowly. He stopped checking the clock. He watched the rain drip from the awning like a slow heartbeat. And when he finally stood to leave, he looked once more at Nilo. Still there, still breathing, still not waiting. He nodded. "I think I understand." The shopkeeper smiled. "Then you don't need to." He left, lighter, quieter, not because something was solved, but because something was softened. That's the gift of non-waiting, of being, of the cat who sat, simply to sit. So tonight, if your heart is racing, if your thoughts are rushing ahead, if you find yourself striving even in your stillness, pause, place your hand on your chest, breathe, and remember, you are not a machine. You do not need to perform for peace. You can sit like Nilo with no one to impress, nothing to gain, nowhere to be. And in that sitting, you will find yourself again, not as someone improved, but as someone returned to the breath, to the body, to the moment that never needed fixing. Let go of the then. Come back to the now. Because the cat, he's still there. Eyes soft, tail curled, teaching everything by doing nothing. In a small temple nestled between two ancient hills, there was a mirror. It wasn't grand. It wasn't polished. It sat quietly in a wooden frame, simple, unassuming. But those who looked into it often cried, not because the mirror showed them something terrible, but because it showed them something true. People came from far to see this mirror. Some brought questions, others brought guilt, shame, longing. They stood before the mirror, expecting answers, but the mirror gave none. It only reflected, not with judgment, with honesty. One woman stood before it after losing someone she loved. She whispered, "Show me what I've become." And the mirror showed her not the grief, but the space beneath it, not the ache, but the strength that had grown in its shadow. She fell to her knees, not in despair, but in recognition of herself, who she truly was, who she had always been. The mirror didn't change her, it revealed her, and that was enough. There's a saying in the old Zen texts, when the mind is clear, the mirror reflects truth. When the mind is clouded, the mirror reflects the clouds. We often think the world is what it is, but really, the world is what we carry inside. When we're angry, everything feels like an argument. When we're afraid, everything feels like a threat. When we're unloved, even kindness feels suspicious. But when we are present, when we come back to the stillness beneath the noise, the mirror begins to shift. Not because it changes, but because we do. The mirror, like life, is always neutral. It simply returns to us what we offer it. And so the practice is not to fix the mirror. It is to clear the mind, to soften the heart, to look without flinching, without decorating the truth, without dimming the light. Elias was a traveler who came to the temple seeking clarity. He had made mistakes, hurt people, lost his way. He stood before the mirror and waited to be punished, but it didn't scold him. It simply reflected, and what he saw broke him. Not because it was ugly, but because it was human. He saw his fear, his need to belong, his attempts to love even when love had been twisted by pain. And he cried, because for the first time, he didn't hate what he saw. He understood it. And that was the beginning of his return, not to who he used to be, but to who he truly was. The mirror had no power of its own. Its power came from stillness, from being what so few of us ever dare to be, a witness without agenda. And this is what true presence offers. Not correction, reflection. A space where what is can be seen, and in being seen, can soften, can heal, can begin again. We often think healing comes from effort, from striving, from pushing harder, from fixing. But sometimes healing comes from facing, from standing still long enough to let the truth rise, and from greeting it not with shame, but with grace. The mirror taught that, and the monks who kept it knew this practice was not about becoming better. It was about becoming honest. Honest with what we carry, honest with what we avoid, honest with what we hope to hide, even from ourselves. So tonight, find a mirror, not just the glass kind, but any reflection, a moment of silence, a breath, a word that stings because it's true. Don't turn away. Lean in. Ask gently, what am I seeing? And ask more gently still, can I meet this without judgment? That is the true test. Not whether you are flawless, but whether you can love yourself in the face of what you see. Because the mirror does not wait for you to be perfect. It simply waits for you to look, and in that gaze, to remember who you are, what you carry, and what is asking to be held, not hidden. So let the reflection come. Let it be real. Let it crack the surface, not to break you, but to make space for something deeper, something truer, something soft. That's what the mirror holds. Not just your image, but your essence. And when you meet that with breath, with softness, with eyes that do not flinch, you will find something more radiant than beauty. You will find truth, and in that truth, you will find peace. There's a forest in the north, where the trees grow in slow spirals and the moss moves like breath. No one owns it. No one named it. But the villagers nearby call it the quiet. Not because it is empty, but because it listens. In this forest, birds sing and stop. Winds pass and pause. Even footsteps seem to hush themselves. People don't go there to hike. They go to stop fixing, to stop striving, to stop being anything. But here, an old man named Len would visit every month. He never told anyone why. He'd sit beneath the same tree with a thermos of tea and a small wool blanket and do nothing. No reading, no meditating, no trying. He just sat, eyes open, heart soft, breath slow. Children once followed him in secret, curious. They expected him to be doing something wise, but all they saw was stillness. It's boring. One whispered. The other shook her head. No, it's quiet. And somehow, they understood the difference. We often think quiet means absence, but silence is not the lack of sound. It's the fullness of presence, the space between heartbeats, the pause after truth, the breath that reminds you you are alive, and you don't have to earn it. In the forest, Len didn't search for anything. He let the trees speak not in words, but in weight. He let the wind pass not to deliver messages, but to remind him he wasn't alone. He listened to the silence, not as something to analyze, but as something to join. And over time, it joined him. It seeped into his bones, into his movements, into the way he spoke slowly, with pauses that felt like places to rest. His friends noticed. He didn't rush anymore, didn't fill space with opinions, didn't fear not knowing. He smiled more, not out of happiness, but out of wholeness. A kind of peace that didn't need to be proven. When someone asked him once, "What do you do when you go out there?" he replied, "I listen to what doesn't need to be said." That's the thing about silence. It's not something you make. It's something you remember. Like a room you forgot existed inside you. A room with no clocks, no mirrors, no walls, just breath and being. And in that room, you begin to hear what life sounds like without effort. Not the world's noise, your own presence, the hum of blood in your wrist, the creak of your spine, the whisper that says, "You don't need to earn your place." Stillness is not laziness. It is alignment. It is the body, the heart, the breath returning to each other. And when that happens, you don't become less. You become clear. You don't fade. You illuminate. In the forest, even the animals knew. Deer came closer. Birds didn't startle. Because stillness, when real, doesn't separate you. It makes you part of the whole. You breathe, and the trees breathe with you. You listen, and the wind quiets too. You stop, and realize you are never behind. You are always already. home. So if your life feels loud right now, if your mind is sprinting in circles, if your soul is tired of trying, sit. Don't fix your posture. Don't search for insight. Don't even ask to be healed. Just be. Let the silence come to you, like mist, like warmth, like something that remembers you. Even when you forget yourself, let it hold you. Let it undo you. Let it remind you. You do not need to be brilliant, or busy, or bold. You need to be here. And that is enough. Because in this stillness, you will begin to hear the part of you that's been waiting, not to be found, to be allowed to rest, to breathe, to exist without effort. Len lived many years, and in his final weeks, when his breath grew shallow and the room grew quiet, someone asked if he was afraid. He smiled. Barely. I've been practicing silence my whole life. I think it's ready to welcome me. And when he passed, there were no speeches, just wind in the trees, and a stillness that stayed long after the door had closed. So tonight, wherever you are, city or mountain, crowded or alone, find your stillness, not by forcing, by letting go. Let the breath come. Let the noise fall. Let the silence hold what words cannot. And in that silence, do nothing, because nothing is needed. You are already whole. There comes a time in every life not with a loud crash, but a quiet fatigue when the soul whispers, sit. Not because you've failed. Not because you've run out of options, but because it's time. Time to stop running. Time to stop proving. Time to just be like a cat. Yes, a cat. Not the fierce ones who stalk in the wild, but the domestic ones, the soft, sun-chasing, window-watching kind, the kind that curls into the exact shape of peace, the kind that knows when to move and when to simply breathe. There's a cat named Tula in the neighborhood. No collar, no owner, yet she belongs to everyone. You'll find her on rooftops at dusk, on the steps of a bakery at dawn, in someone's garden at noon asleep, belly up to the sky. She's not waiting for anything, not hunting, not planning, just here, present, purring, complete. She doesn't care what time it is. She doesn't care who watches. She follows warmth. She follows instinct. She sits in silence and becomes part of it. One morning, I watched her settle on a stone bench, front paws tucked, eyes soft slits of gold. Around her, the world rushed. Buses grumbled, phones buzzed, people passed, but Tula remained unmoved, unhurried, unbothered. She didn't meditate. She didn't center herself. She simply stopped, and the stopping was enough. Sometimes, I think cats remember something we've forgotten. How to do nothing. How to be still and still be alive. How to rest without guilt. How to breathe without asking whether you've earned it. We humans fill silence like it's an emergency. We fidget, we scroll, we fix. But what if, like Tula, we just stopped trying to make meaning, stopped pretending we're not tired, stopped chasing a life that's already here? What if we sat not to solve anything, but to remember how stillness feels in the spine, how breath tastes when it's not hurried, how the sunlight doesn't ask anything of us, except to receive it. That's what cats teach. That presence isn't performance. It's a posture, a softness, a return. Tula once curled in my lap. Uninvited, I didn't move. I barely breathed. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't her destination. I was her pause. And maybe I could be mine, too. Maybe we all can. We don't need perfect cushions. We don't need incense. We don't need mantras carved in Sanskrit. We just need to stop, to sit, to notice the way our fingers rest when we're not gripping anything, to feel the weight of our body not as burden but as anchor, to watch the thoughts pass like birds outside a window and not follow them, to be not as a task but as a truth. It is enough. You are enough. Tula knows this. She never wonders, am I doing this right? She never worries. Should I be somewhere else? She's never halfway between here and there. She is always completely here. And in that here-ness, she becomes what we long for: peace, presence, permission. So, if your heart feels worn, if your mind buzzes like a phone that won't stop ringing, if you keep asking, what next stop? Sit. Anywhere. Let your back soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let your breath come home, not to a better version of you, but to this one, the one who has tried so hard, loved so much, carried so many questions. This one deserves rest. This one deserves quiet. This one deserves to sit like a cat in a sunbeam, doing nothing, needing nothing, being everything. Tula is still out there, somewhere probably on a windowsill, eyes closed, body warm, unaware of her wisdom. But you know it now. You felt it, in your ribs, in your hands, in the space between thoughts, that you don't need to become anything else. You just need to become still. And from that stillness, something sacred rises, not noise, not answers, but truth. And the truth is simple. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are here, alive, breathing. And it is enough. Sit, dear one, like a cat, and let the world wait. There is an old house on the hill abandoned, quiet, always closed. Its wooden walls faded to silver by sun and time. Its garden overgrown, wild with memory. Its windows clouded, but still watching. No one lives there. But people stop. Not many. Not often. But they stop. They sit on the broken stone step. They lean against the peeling frame. They place flowers at the base of the door. And they cry, not because the house holds their stories, but because it holds their stillness. There is something sacred in a door that does not swing, something soft in the silence of a threshold not crossed. It says, without words, I'm here. I'm not asking you to come in. I'm simply not leaving. That is presence, and it is enough. We are taught to knock, to enter, to fix, to speak. But there are moments, sacred ones, when all that's needed is to stand quietly, like a door, like a quiet witness to pain that cannot be solved, to grief that cannot be hurried, to love that needs no explanation. There's a story of a girl named Marin who used to visit that house. She never tried to go in. She never touched the handle. She simply sat on the steps for hours, and when someone asked her why, she whispered, because it stays. In a world where everything moves, where even people drift like clouds, that house did not. It did not demand, did not invite, did not apologize. It just was, and that was more healing than advice. more comforting than solutions. Sometimes, people don't need your answers. They need your anchoring, not your words. Your weathered, wooden, unwavering presence. A can, qua, unmoving. Says, you don't have to open. I'm not here to push. I'm just here. And it changes everything. There was a boy once who lost his father. He couldn't speak of it. Wouldn't cry. Couldn't pray. But he went to the old house and sat on the stoop, day after day. No one asked why, because they understood. The house did what no person could. It didn't flinch. It didn't try to make it better. It didn't need to understand. It simply stayed. And one morning, the boy wept, not because the house opened, but because it didn't need to. That's the mystery of presence. It heals not by doing, but by being. By saying without sound, you are not alone. And in that not aloneness, the heart begins to thaw, not because the wound is gone, but because the wound is seen and still accepted. We rush to open things, conversations, emotions, people, but not all things need opening. Some need waiting. Some need gentleness. Some just need us to be there, long enough for the door inside them to creak open on its own. Not because we pushed, but because we waited. The house on the hill still stands. No one restored it. No one painted it. No one claimed it. And yet, it is loved deeply, because love is not always active. Sometimes, love is stillness, the kind that says, I will be here, whether you are ready or not. And this is what we forget. You don't need to fix people. You don't need to say the right thing. You don't need to open every closed heart. Sometimes, the most sacred gift you can offer is to be like that door, unafraid to be closed, unashamed to be quiet, unwilling to leave. So if someone in your life is hurting, don't rush to pry them open. Don't offer tools when they haven't asked. Be the frame they can lean against, the silence they can breathe in, the step they can sit on when they're ready to feel again. That is presence. That is compassion. And that is enough. If you are the one who is hurting, remember this. You don't have to open for anyone. You don't owe healing to speed. You don't need to explain your silence. You're allowed to be a closed door for a while. And those who matter will not bang. They will not rattle your frame. They will sit nearby, leave tea on the step, whisper stories through the cracks. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, to open even a little, you'll know you were never alone. You were always held, even when no one entered. So tonight, be a door, closed, still, holy, and know this. You are not broken. You are just being, and that is more than enough. Jonah feared empty rooms, not spiders, not heights, not the dark, but rooms without sound, without people, without something. Even as a child, silence made his chest tighten. At school, he was the kid who hummed softly while doing homework. At home, he kept music playing even when he wasn't listening. Noise was comfort. Noise was proof he existed. Because in the quiet, things got too loud. Thoughts, regrets, questions. He didn't know how to sit with those. So, he ran. From room to room. From one busy schedule to another. From one conversation to the next scroll. The next notification. The next noise. Until one day, not dramatically, but inevitably it all stopped. A canceled trip, a power outage, a phone that wouldn't turn on. Jonah found himself alone, in his apartment, with no distractions. The silence roared. He tried to pace, but his feet got tired. Tried to hum, but even that felt forced. So finally, he sat, back to the wall, hands in his lap. No light but the fading sky. He expected panic, but what came surprised him. Breath, just breath, and beneath it, something softer. Not fear, but presence. It didn't come like lightning. It came like mist. First, around his shoulders, then behind his eyes, then deep in the part of him he hadn't visited in years. And in that stillness, something inside whispered, "You're here. You've always been here," he cried. Not because he was sad, but because he realized he'd never really met himself. He'd been living beside himself, around himself, chasing noise to avoid the depth of his own being. But now, sitting in the soft dark, he didn't feel empty. He felt full of memory, of feeling, of self. That was the paradox. The void wasn't hollow. It was home. The silence wasn't absence. It was invitation, not to do, but to be. Jonah began spending more time with it, not because he had to, because he wanted to. He turned off the background music, stopped filling every pause with words, learned to breathe deeply, not just for air, but for awareness. He discovered things, like how grief softens when you don't flinch from it, like how joy hums quietly, beneath even the ordinary, like how his own body had a rhythm he'd ignored. Silence taught him, not with lessons, but with space. Space to remember, to feel, to return. There's a teaching in Zen. The way is not in the sky. It is in the heart. Jonah had searched everywhere else. But now, finally, he'd come home. He began to write, not for others, for himself. Tiny notes, snippets of memory, questions with no need for answers. They became his mirror, his way of saying, "I see you." He didn't become perfect, still rushed. Sometimes, still reached for his phone when things got heavy. But he always found his way back, to the quiet, to the breath, to the room with nothing in it, except truth. Because in that room, he realized he was not broken. He was just unlistened to. And now, he listened, patiently, kindly, fully. People noticed. He spoke slower, laughed deeper, listened better. Not because he trained himself, but because silence had tuned him like an instrument back to resonance. So, if you're afraid of the emptiness of the pause, the gap, the quiet between know this, you're not alone. We all fear the mirror with no distractions, but that mirror holds your reflection, and it's beautiful, not because it's flawless, but because it's real, and real is enough. You are enough. The next time you find yourself reaching for the noise, the scrolling, the talking, the filling pause, ask gently, what am I running from? And even more gently, what might happen if I stay? You don't need answers right away. Just breath, just presence, just space. Because in that space, your truest self is waiting. Not perfect, not polished, but present. And that is where life begins again. Not in noise, in noticing, not in doing, in being. So tonight, turn off the extra light. Put down the phone. Sit in that room, the one inside you. the one that feels too quiet. And listen, there's something there, and it's been waiting for you all along, every day. We pass through doors, literal ones, glass, wood, iron. They swing, slide, creak, click. But there are other doors too, invisible, unexpected, often overlooked. The moment between inhale and exhale, the pause before you answer a question, the silence between two songs. These are doors, quiet ones into your inner world. We often think self-discovery requires retreats, rituals, or revelations. But sometimes it begins with boiling water. Maren realized this one morning while making tea. The kettle whistled. Steam curled in the morning light. She stood still. No rush, no phone, just that moment. And something in her opened, not dramatically, more like a curtain lifting. Slowly, a soft awareness, I'm here. She didn't expect it, didn't chase it, but there it was, a sense of self, clear and steady. She sat with her tea, hands wrapped around the mug, and just listened. Not to sounds, to herself, to the quiet behind the thoughts, the warmth behind the ache. It wasn't profound, but it was real. And that's what mattered. That was the door, and it was always there. We miss these doors because we're trained to look for fireworks, for mountaintop moments, for breakthroughs with theme music. But the inner world isn't flashy. It's gentle. It knocks softly and waits for us to notice. When you tie your shoes without rushing, that's a door. When you feel the soap on your hands instead of rushing the wash, that's a door. When you say, I'm tired, and mean it, not as complaint, but as truth, that's a door. Each one opens into a space beneath the noise, a space where you are not your to-do list, not your title, not your timeline, just you. And in that space, you remember, not something new, something ancient, something you've carried all along, yourself. There's an old teaching before enlightenment: chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The tasks don't change, but the presence does. Maren began to find these doors everywhere, in the curve of her dog's sleeping body, in the way the wind tugged at her sleeves, in the silence of a waiting room. And each time she stepped through, she found herself less frantic, less scattered, more gathered, more whole. One afternoon, she walked past a bakery, and the scent pulled her back not just into memory, but into presence. She remembered her grandmother's kitchen, not with nostalgia, with embodiment. She could taste the sugar in the air, feel the tiled floor, hear the hum of quiet love. That was a door, too, not backward, inward, a way back to the parts of her that still held joy, still held tenderness, still held her. These doors don't require skill, only stillness, only noticing, and trust that what they reveal is worth seeing, even when it hurts. Especially then, because some doors open into grief, into fear, into the parts of us we buried beneath noise and doing and duty. But even those rooms hold light. Even those spaces are sacred. They are not broken. They are unvisited. And now, you're ready to visit. Each time you pause before reacting. Each time you notice your breath instead of your panic. Each time you stay with discomfort instead of numbing it, you are stepping through. You are coming home, not to perfection, to presence, to the heartbeat beneath the hurry, the soul beneath the skin, and that return, slow, ordinary, repeated, is the deepest healing, because it tells your body you are safe, tells your mind you don't have to run, tells your spirit, I see you, I'm here, we're okay. Maren didn't become a monk, didn't start lighting candles or reciting mantras. She just lived, but more awake, more attuned, more at peace. Her life didn't get quieter. She got quieter within it. And in that quiet, doors kept appearing, and she kept walking through. You can too. You already do. You just haven't called them doors. Yet, that moment you looked at a tree and felt your breath slow. That was a door. That time, a stranger smiled and you felt human again. That was a door. That second before sleep, when the world fades and your heart speaks honestly. That is a door. And each time you step through, you gather a piece of yourself, not like collecting, like remembering. So, tonight, when the world feels loud, when your heart aches for something you can't name, find one door, just one. Maybe it's in your tea, maybe in your tired sigh, maybe in the way your hand rests over your chest, and step through. You don't need a map, just your breath, just your noticing, just you, waiting for you. On the other side, it was a late autumn afternoon, the kind where the air turns gold and even silence feels warm. Mara sat on a wooden bench outside the temple, sipping tea. Next to her sat Eli, 7 years old, curious, always asking. He looked up and asked, "Mara, what is karma?" She smiled, not surprised. Children ask the most honest questions. She set down her cup and asked back, "What do you think it is?" Eli frowned. "Is it when something bad happens because you did something bad?" She shook her head slowly. "That's what many people think, but it's not a punishment. It's a mirror." He blinked. "A mirror." Yes. Karma is how the world reflects what we put into it. She picked up a small pebble and tossed it gently into the pond nearby. "See that ripple?" Eli nodded. "That's karma. Every thought, every word, every action like a pebble dropped into the water of life. It moves, it echoes, it comes back. But what if I didn't mean to make a bad ripple?" he asked softly. Mara smiled. "Then the ripple might be softer, but it still moves. What matters is learning to see the water, to drop your pebbles gently." They sat quietly for a moment. A bird sang. Leaves drifted. The pond shimmered. Then Eli asked, "So, if someone hurts me, is that their karma?" Mara paused, then answered, "Yes, and how you respond. That's yours." He looked down at his small hands. "That's a lot of responsibility." "It is," she said gently, "but it's also freedom. Freedom, yes? Because karma isn't about being punished. It's about being awake. Every moment gives you a choice, and that choice shapes everything." Eli leaned back against the bench. "That sounds hard." "It is," she said, "and beautiful." Then she leaned close and whispered, "Want to hear a secret?" He nodded quickly. "The real magic of karma is that it always begins now. Now, yes. Not last year, not last lifetime. Now. This breath, this choice, this kindness you decide to give. You're never trapped by your past. Karma is not a jail. It's a path." He smiled. "So I get to make good ripples. Right now." She nodded. "Exactly." He picked up his own pebble, thought for a moment, then tossed it gently. The ripple moved, soft, steady, true. Later that evening, Mara wrote in her journal, "Today, a child asked me about karma. I realized I've spent years unlearning fear around that word. Karma is not thunder waiting to strike. It's wind waiting to turn. It's not a ledger of wrongs. It's the quiet math of intention. The more aware I become of what I bring into the world, not just in actions, but in presence, the more gently the world responds. Karma, I think, is simply the truth coming back, shaped like our choices." The next morning, Eli returned. He had questions, always. "Does karma happen fast sometimes?" Mara said, "Sometimes it takes a while, like a seed." He tilted his head. "So, it's like gardening." "Exactly. You plant what you want to grow." "Yes, but what if weeds come up anyway?" "Then," she smiled, "you learn what needs healing. Karma is not control, it's care." He sat with that for a while, then asked, "So if I'm kind, but someone's mean back, did I do karma wrong?" "Number little one, that's their seed, not yours. You can't control what others plant, only what you water." He looked relieved. They sat in silence again, and Mara thought, how strange that grown-ups think karma is complicated, when really, it's just presence, multiplied. Each moment, a door. Each word, a brushstroke. Each thought, a step. It isn't about perfection, it's about awareness. And when you move with awareness, karma becomes less of a burden and more of a song, a melody that returns, a rhythm that reminds, a truth that reflects. Eli once asked, "Does karma have eyes?" she said. "No, but your heart does, because that's where karma lives. Not in fate, in feeling, not in punishment, in patterns, not in somewhere out there, in here, always in here. There's an old cabin deep in the hills. No road leads to it. No signs point the way. But people find it when they're ready. It isn't beautiful. Its roof slants. Its walls groan. Its windows are always fogged. And inside, it's dark. Not frightening, but full. Full of the kind of dark that feels thick like velvet, like breath held too long. People step in, expecting fear, but they don't find monsters. They find mirrors. In the shadows, their shapes soften, their masks fade, their truths glow, and someone always whispers, "Oh, I didn't know I was still carrying that." Because darkness, you see, is not evil. It is unseen, unmet, unloved. It is the part of you that was never held, not because it was bad, because it was hidden. There's a girl named Lena who found the cabin after a long walk, not through woods, but through grief. She had lost her way, not literally, spiritually. She had tried everything: therapy, books, long talks with kind friends, but something stayed heavy, unspoken. So she walked, and one day, stumbled across the cabin. She stepped in. Her hands shook. But the silence didn't bite. It breathed, and in that breath, she sat and cried, not loudly, more like a cloud, gently raining from inside, in the dark. There was no need to pretend, no pressure to smile, no expectation to explain. She was just Lena, wounded, tired, true, and the dark welcomed her, held her, not with answers, with room. She returned, again and again, not to be fixed, to be seen. And one evening, she brought a candle, lit it slowly, and watched as shadows danced, not disappeared, but moved. She whispered, Maybe that's all the dark needs, a little warmth, because darkness doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be met, needs to be sat with, listened to, loved. Each of us carries rooms like that cabin, hidden, quiet, unvisited. We store parts of ourselves there, the shame, the anger, the fears we weren't allowed to feel. And because no one went in with us, we thought the dark meant we were bad. But we were never bad. We were just alone. Now, you are not. You can enter, candle in hand. You can sit, breathe, say, I see you. And in that simple seeing, healing begins, not as lightning, as glow, steady, gentle, honest. Lena once wrote, the scariest thing I ever did was sit in my own darkness. But it didn't devour me. It introduced me to me. So if your heart feels heavy, not because of what's around you, but because of what's within, don't run, don't label, don't lock the door tighter. Sit, breathe, light one small truth. Even if it flickers, even if it shakes, that's enough. The dark doesn't ask for perfection, only presence, only someone willing to say, I'll stay, even here. And slowly, the shadows soften, not because they vanish, because they are held, because the light wasn't meant to chase them out. It was meant to sit beside them and be. You don't have to illuminate everything. Just one corner, one feeling, one breath. And that is how you begin. Not by becoming someone new, by becoming someone whole. All of you, not just the bright, especially the bruised, the blamed, the buried, because even those parts are you, and you are worth the light. In a small temple nestled above the clouds, there's a room with nothing inside, no statues, no cushions, no incense, just space, and a door that never closes. Visitors often walk in, look around, and whisper, is this it? They expect something, a symbol, a sign, a purpose. But the monks only smile and say, this is the practice of what the visitors ask, of nothing. It sounds absurd until you try it. One day, a traveler named Sam entered that room. He had spent years chasing wholeness in books, in relationships, in accomplishments. Each time he got close, it slipped. Each time he grasped, it vanished. So now, weary and wondering, he sat in the room with nothing. At first, his mind panicked. This is a waste. It said, you should be doing something. You came all this way for nothing. But he stayed because there was nowhere left to go. And slowly, like dawn spreading without sound, something inside him softened. The itch to explain, to solve, to perform. It eased, and in its place came space. Not the kind between walls, the kind between thoughts, the kind within breath. He didn't feel enlightened. He felt still, and in that stillness, he met something unexpected. Himself. Not the version shaped by stories, the one beneath, wordless, weightless, whole. That's what the monks meant. Nothing isn't emptiness. It's the absence of pretending, the absence of grasping. The quiet after every question falls away, and what remains is you sitting, being, breathing. Enough. Later. A monk named Rin told Sam, the hardest part of the path isn't walking it, it's stopping. Sam asked. Why? Rin smiled. Because when you stop, there's nothing left to hide behind. No identity, No ambition, no distraction, just this. And this is the doorway to truth. Not the kind you read, the kind you become. In Zen, there's a saying, when you realize there's nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. But that realization doesn't come from adding more. It comes from subtracting, until what's left is so simple, it cannot be named. And yet, it is everything. Sam stayed in the room for hours. He watched the light change, watched the dust float, watched the stories inside him rise and fall. He didn't cling, didn't judge, just sat, like a mountain, like a cloud, like someone who had finally remembered what it means to be. No task, no goal, just this moment, as it is, whole, complete, unimproved. That is the mystery of nothing. It is not a void. It is a mirror, and when you sit with it long enough, it reflects back the deepest truth. You are not broken. You are not missing. You are not late. You are. And that is enough. Sam returned the next morning, not to learn, to be. He sat again, no expectations, and the silence welcomed him like an old friend. This time, the thoughts didn't shout, they whispered, they moved like wind, and he let them pass. Not because he didn't care, because he no longer confused them with himself. He had touched the still point, the center, the nothing that is everything. And from that space, he smiled, not because something happened, because something didn't. No striving, no seeking, only sitting, only now, only this. And in that simplicity, he found what he had searched for all along. You've just walked through stories, not to understand them, but to feel them, not to collect more ideas, but to remember something ancient inside you. That peace doesn't come from fixing. It comes from allowing. That wholeness isn't earned. It's remembered. And that stillness isn't the absence of life. It's the pulse beneath it. Maybe you saw yourself in the gardener who let the leaves fall, or the child who asked about karma, or the one who sat in darkness and found light. Maybe you didn't expect to feel so much. Maybe you're not sure what changed, but something softened, something breathed. That's enough. Because this isn't the end of a story. It's the opening of a door. Not one you need to walk through in grand steps. Just one you keep noticing each day. In the way you pause before reacting. In the way you breathe before speaking. In the way you listen. Not to respond, but to receive. That's meditation. That's mindfulness. That's love. So don't rush to do anything. Just sit for a moment longer. Let the words settle. Let the quiet hold you. And when you rise, rise gently. Not to chase peace, but to carry it. Thank you for being here, for listening, for breathing, for remembering. And if this space brought even one small calm to your day, let it ripple, like a bell, like a leaf, like a light left on, for someone else to find their way home. We'll be here for the next step, the next breath, the next story. Until then, be well, be still, be you.